Can you believe it? The Dreamcast turned 15 years old today. On September 9th, 1999, the Dreamcast was launched in North America. And unfortunately, this would be Sega's last console, and in my opinion, the best console they ever made. The Dreamcast. Ironically, originally I had the black Dreamcast. I originally had the sports edition of the Dreamcast, which I'll get into that why. But what am I going to do to celebrate the 15th anniversary besides play some Dreamcast games later today after this video is over? I'm going to talk about some of my favorite games on this console. One or two that meant a lot, even though I never got to play them. And just a little bit about the Dreamcast. So, at this time when the Dreamcast originally came out, the PlayStation 1 machine was rolling. The PlayStation 1 it came out in 1995. Ironically, on the very same day, 4 years earlier. Next year will be the 20th anniversary of the PlayStation 1, if you believe it or not. But they announced the Dreamcast and bam, launched it. It was like that quickly, you know. The system was launched incredibly fast. And I could not get one at launch. I really wanted a Dreamcast. I never got a Saturn. I still don't have a Saturn yet, actually, believe it or not. I love the Genesis, but at the time the Saturn came out, it just seemed to me at the time that Sega had forgotten everything that made the Genesis popular. Now, at this time, we still weren't at the phase of the launch date was the day the game came out. We still were at the phases where you go to your video store and sometimes the games weren't always out when they're supposed to. So whatever was on the shelf, that was your perception. It was out everywhere. You still weren't at the point of people, you could buy everything online, though there were ways to buy some things, obviously. And in my world, I wasn't doing that yet, so for me, there wasn't that. And at the perception of looking at the rail store and looking at the stores, they seemed to me forget that. And at the time, video game journalism did affect me, like as a kid, being still in the early, in the 20s, and being young, there was negativity towards the Saturn about how it was designed, why, so I never got one. But the Dreamcast just caught my attention. And so I really wanted one, but I couldn't get one at launch. But I was lucky because I was working security at a mall at the time. Working that morning, and two of the guys who were janitors there, custodians, had actually pre-ordered the Dreamcast at EB Games. Well, it was EB Games at the time. And I happened to be in the back area where the break room was, and they came in to work, and they had just picked up the Dreamcast and all their games and stuff. And I was sitting there. I remember one guy, had gotten Sega bass fishing with the whole reel and stuff. Of course, Sonic Adventure, the big games that had come out and launched the system. And I really, really wanted one, but I couldn't get it. And so, the one game that I'm going to start off with that actually got me to buy a Dreamcast is a sports game. And it was none other than Sega Sports NFL 2K1. Yes, NFL football. Why? Because of online multiplayer. Because you just couldn't play multiplayer with sports. I was really into football at the time. Chicago Bears were pretty good at the time, or I was really into them at the time. And I wanted to play football online. And so this came out. Randy Moss on the cover. And so I bought a Dreamcast Sports Edition, black one, just to play this because it came with, just to play this game. And I will say, the online blew my expectations away. Because when I played, I never had any slowdown I could see, any glitching or anything like that. Granted, this is on a 56K modem too. And had people quit when they were losing, of course, still frustrating to this day in a sense of games, that when people were losing, they just quit. Because they didn't want to hurt their record. But, really fun game. And the truth is, the Dreamcast would build what is now online gaming today. Now, some people would go back to the Sega Channel, which was the very start of anything online here in North America for home console. But the Dreamcast really fleshed out a lot what was online gaming today. The 3DO was the first multimedia console, the PlayStation, but the Dreamcast was so far ahead of its time when it came out. And Sega spent so much money on the online part of it that ultimately that led to the demise of Sega in the home console market. But to me, that is the best console ever made. It is incredibly fun even to this day. What's funny about the Dreamcast when it originally launched was I didn't think this controller was going to be very comfortable, but amazingly, it is incredibly comfortable and easy to play in your hands. Or maybe some of you like the black controller instead. Another thing the Dreamcast had that, no console really did was their VMUs, which are basically like, kind of like Tamagotchi little things, basically. So basically, on certain games, you could just play the little games on this thing and do stuff for the game when you came and plug it back in, and it would load back up. So those are cool little things that no one else had done or has done. I don't really have done since. So let me get to some of the other games that were on the Dreamcast. Some I love and some I don't. But the first one I have to mention, even though I never got to play it originally, and that's Phantasy Star Online. This is version 2, which has more levels, more features, and more evil to combat. Anyway, this for a lot of people was their first online game with the Dreamcast and Phantasy Star Online. The reason why I did not play this game, because it charged an online fee to play, and I would not. One, I couldn't afford it at the time, and two, I refused to pay an online fee to play a video game. So I never got to play this game when it originally came out, though it looked really awesome. I had seen it before. Before I get to more games, I got to get to this, because this is it. Well, people talk about why do you say the online of the Dreamcast is so far ahead of everybody else? That was because they had the web browser with SegaNet to explore the World Wide Web. That it wasn't just a case you had to play games online. You could actually surf the internet. Now, granted, this was simplified, and obviously at the time, but no one else had done this. Was something we take for granted now on console stuff was originally started on the Dreamcast. So now we're going to dig into one of my games I originally bought on the Dreamcast. This is one of my favorite games. If you're an RPG lover, I know it's been ported to PlayStation 2 and other stuff. But Grandia 2. This game is amazing. It really was. This was probably after NFL 2K1. This is probably the second game I ever bought on my Dreamcast. And I'll be honest with you, I was like, look at I'm like, this game's going to look marginally better, than PlayStation or whatever. But this game completely blew me away. It was, the amount of detail in this game, the colors, this game really blew me away. I really loved this game. This was an awesome game from Ubisoft, and if you don't own Grandia 2 for the Dreamcast, you own this RPG, you really ought to own it. It is an awesome, amazing RPG. And I spent many hours playing this game on the Dreamcast. Makes me want to play it right now, actually. So when you talk to racing game, there were a lot of racing games on the Dreamcast. Of course, Star Wars Episode 1 Racer, a really great. I bought this on the Dreamcast because this game was almost, to me, would be almost an arcade perfect port. And it really, in a lot of ways, was. This is really awesome. But of course, it was on other systems. Of course, Hydro Thunder, another awesome, of course, the boat racing game. I love this game. I love Hydro Thunder, just the racing, and the boats and the weapons and power-ups and stuff. A really fun game. But another reason I had to get a Dreamcast was for an arcade game. When I worked at the arcade, also on the side while I was working security, they had this arcade game there, and I absolutely wanted to play that on my home console. And that was Crazy Taxi. Of course, everybody remembers the soundtrack, with Offspring and stuff, Bad Religion. And I really had to have this, because of KFC and Pizza Hut and everything that was in the arcade game. Really fun game if you've never played it. Absolutely love Crazy Taxi. And of course, when you're talking about racing games, you have to bring up Daytona USA, which also had online multiplayer, which was also, again, fun to play online. To see these games ported to a console and look a lot like the arcade games was so amazing at the time, and loved this game in the arcade. Great game. And of course, if you're talking fighter games, you have to talk about Soul Calibur from Namco. This is a graphically impressive game on the Dreamcast, though rather short really. The first Soul Calibur was rather a short game. It doesn't take terribly long to get through the game, but graphically, to do a game like this, again, the Dreamcast was the first console to say, hey, look at these systems are getting to arcade perfect graphics, which also unfortunately led to the end of the arcade. But this game, for people who are fans of the fighting game, this game was a really awesome port. Now, when I originally saw this for the Dreamcast, I had to get, because I had played Wetrex on the N64, and that is Wetrex Plus. A fun little 3D puzzle game. Basically, the point of it is that water keeps dropping down, and you're trying to stop the water from flowing over the side. If you get too much water over the side, you lose. It's as simplistic as that. So you're dropping land pieces, and trying to growing the landscape, moving the landscape. Dropping comets and other stuff to dry out the water, to stop the water from dripping over the side. If too much water drips over the side by a certain amount of time, you'll lose the level. So a really fun game, but very challenging at the same time. And here's was another very important game on the Dreamcast for me, and that was Shenmue. Now, to be honest, I didn't get Shenmue right when it came out. There was so much hype, so much talk about the game, that actually at the time would drive me away from a video game. There was so much hype for Shenmue that I didn't get it right away. But I did eventually pick it up, and this game completely blew me away. Because this was like the first, like really highly detailed 3D, almost like a living world video game that had ever been made. With a great story. I know a lot of people pick on this game today because they talk about QuickTime events and stuff, but that was the only way you could do that stuff at the time. And this game was just so unbelievably groundbreaking when it came out. And unfortunately, because of how groundbreaking and expensive it was, that ultimately led to the demise of this series. But this is an amazing. If you've never played Shenmue, you have to play it. If you like Yakuza, you will like this, because a lot of Yakuza is, in a sense, in some ways, a very spiritual successor to this game, to be honest with you. But awesome game. It's a shame the story of Shenmue never got finished in video game form. But talking about in the footsteps of Sega classic RPGs like Stalkers and Shining Force and other games like that would be none other than Time Stalkers. Unravel the Tangle of Time, which again, a great 3D game. This game, had a lot of characters, a lot of monsters. Of course, had VMU mini games. This game, you basically travel through time periods, multiple time periods in the game to beat it. It looked awesome, and just again. But at the same time, in the footsteps of like Stalkers and like Shining Force and stuff, it was a mixture of both. A really good game, really good, but I think some ways hard game at the same time, and I really enjoyed playing that game. And of course, you can't talk about a system without there being worms, so Worms Armageddon. The cute, heavy-armed, and ready for action. Of course, this is a typical Worms game. Fun, battle game, basically. If you ever played Worms, you know what I'm talking about. This is a really, really fun game. Like all the ones in the series. Now, at the time of the Dreamcast, Virtual Fighter was a big deal. And when they ported over Virtual Fighter, was it 3TB? Yeah, 3TB. The legend continues. This is graphically actually an impressive game on the Dreamcast. Again, Sega's own fighting series that unfortunately is probably stagnant right now. But this really showed off what the Dreamcast could do in a lot of ways in a fighting game. Just like to see how much they smoothed out all the polygons of these characters from 1 to 2 or 2 to 3 to Dreamcast, and the fact they pulled it off close in some ways to the arcade game was just amazing. Again, the awesome fighting game. If you like a technical fighting game on like real life martial arts, not like over dramatized stuff, this is a great fighting game. But I have to get to my game, my favorite football game of all time, and that is NFL Blitz 2000 on the Dreamcast. I love NFL Blitz. Again, at the time that when I heard this was released, this was going to be like, to me, an arcade perfect port. In a lot of ways it is. It is an awesome port of NFL Blitz. You know how much I love the game. Just the no refs, no rules, no mercy. Again, this system for me was the start of the arcade perfection ports. We got to the point where you really didn't start to see the notice between the arcade game and the home console. At least it was so not glaringly noticeable, like frames were missing and character moments were missing like they were in these games. And the Dreamcast had a lot of other great games on it. This is just some of the games I want to talk about, because it is the 15th anniversary of a console that really meant a lot to me when it came out. And so I'd love to hear you guys' comments below of what your memories are of the Dreamcast, what your favorite games are. Can you believe it's already been 15 years? It sure doesn't feel like it. Anyway, guys, like always, thanks for watching, and I'll put up another video soon.